Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Meter Cute interviews here on Meter and Mayhem. Today, I'll be chatting with Melanie A. Rawls, a retired composition professor who taught at Florida A&M for nearly 30 years. Melanie's creative work has appeared in places such as the African American Review, The Sun, Penumbra, Starline, and Essence magazine, back when they published fiction. Her scholarly work can also be found in anthologies such as 2014's Perilous and Fair, Women in the Works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Her latest book, After Ever After, was published by Apalachee Press in 2024. Because the book isn't available in the typical online sites, I'll have some ordering information for you down below. Are you ready to learn more about Melanie's work? Me too. Let's sit back, relax, and get ready to fall in love.
Hi, I'm Melanie, and I'm going to read from my new book, After Ever After. And it's dedicated to all the authors and characters who have given me and so many others moments of enchantment, and to my mother and father. All right, so here we go. After Ever After. Of course, they could not live happily forever after. One bright spring morning, silver and frail as a moth, Beauty died in her husband's arms, her last smile affectionate as ever. The old king fled the castle, snatching his person from the clutching hands of children, grandchildren, great and great-great-grandchildren. He evaded his household until he reached the woods on the castle boundary. He vanished within. Beauty was buried in a quiet place on the castle's grounds, and the morning sun shone on the ivy and herbs planted around her stone. The search for the king was diligent. The search is multitudinous, but no trace of the king was found. Only great clawed tracks, trampled bushes, and trees deeply scored in bleeding sap. In the evenings, something howled in the woods, an outcry so loud and savage that the castle's knights patrolled in fours instead of alone or in pairs. During the nights, a roaring like a pride of lions, constant and rough, kept everyone awake. Within a week, something even more disturbing was heard, as if great winds sought to take the castle apart, timber by timber, tile by stone. During the day, the search for the king continued, but no sign of any human was found in the woods. Each night, the howling, screeching, moaning, and roaring crescendoed until no one could rest and everyone became a little crazy. The children suffered bitterly, especially the littlest ones who grieved the adults with wails of, "Where is Grammy? Where's Grampy?" Then 7-year-old Alice and 6-year-old Chris Robin slipped their nurse's attention and got their fleet-footed selves to the woodland edge. "Grampy, Grampy, come back," they piped until borne away by terrified gardeners to be restored to their parents and their hapless nurse. And the king came home. He rolled himself up in dull red velvet and sat by the window where he could view the queen's grave. He let his hair and beard grow, not eating, not sleeping, but snapping and growling like a tethered dog. Ella, his eldest child, took the throne because business, politics, and life go on. The family's children were instructed to leave their progenitor to his grief, but little Miss Muffet, baptized Aurora, sneaked into the king's den one day, waddled up to him, and patted his knees. "Up, up," she commanded. The old king looked down at her through the shambles of his hair. Aurora scrambled onto his lap and, with her dimpled toddler hands, twisted up his beard. So the old king stopped barricading himself by his window, and the household sighed in relief. But something anomalous was afoot in the castle. The servants began to whisper of glittering eyes and shadows of cabinets and closets. Unseen comings and goings rumbled in the foundations. Roof tiles slid. Water exploded messily from the faucets and pumps, and the glazing fell out of windows. Mirrors clouded. Swags of cobwebs crept down from the ceilings overnight. Shelves of fungi sprouted from the silk-paneled walls. Queen Ella finally went to her father and said very firmly, "Now, Papa, you must stop all of this. You know Mama would not approve, and it isn't good for the children." He lunged roaring to his feet and swiped at her. She leaped back, hand to mouth, then fled the room. Some time later, nearing dusk, when Queen Beauty's grave was in shadow, a son-in-law of the king soft-footed in, a great-great-grandchild on his hip, the one who had been nicknamed Bo Peep. She was notorious for emanating a winsome mischief, and she stretched out her arms to the hairy hillock that was her grampy. The old king accepted her. Her rosy smile stretched wider, and she smacked her great-great-grandfather's cheeks with her plump, damp palms. The son-in-law said, "It was love that disenchanted you. Don't become the beast. The children will not like it." His father-in-law's eyes glittered within the tangled masses of hair. And this is where I always stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. That was I love the story. I have my own copy of it.
Oh,
And I've
good.
read it many times and
Oh,
gave it as gifts this past holiday season. So I love the story and the minute you start reading, I start to sort of tear up
oh,
because
did you really?
I'm already thinking about sort of how the story is going to progress, and it's just such
Mhm.
a beautiful um commentary and experience of grief, I think.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful.
Oh,
Um,
well,
I'm
I'm glad you
curious.
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm curious to know about what book has caused the most mayhem in your life, in your own reading life.
Okay, well, that's an easy answer. The Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien, which I read when I was 15 years old. And it changed my life. It changed my mind. It just sort of redid me. And I had been reading fantasy and science fiction in particular before because, well, I've got the taste for it. I like the strange. I like magic. I always wanted magic, even as a child. I loved Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. That's that was what I was looking for, even, by the time I finally learned to read. But The Lord of the Rings is sort of another level. It made me conscious of just the the depth and the breadth of a human's imagination. It made me aware of just what is possible when you have a dream, I guess, in your heart, when you have a vision in your head. Uh, that there, all it takes is imagination. And so, yeah, Lord of the Rings. It undid me and redid me. But I do want to mention another book, Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time, which I read when I was 10 or 11. And that book let me know that the reading you do for pleasure, because for me, all reading is for pleasure. It's for knowledge and everything else, but it's always a pleasure. But that the reading you do for pleasure can also give you a moral compass and some moral clarity. There are a couple of lines in that book's like, "Oh, okay, that's what that is. That's what a book can do for you." So those two books, I'd
Oh,
say, create the most mayhem in my life.
But those are two good ones. Um, have you, and they're very they're sort of not different ends of the fantasy spectrum, but they're sort of different styles of fantasy.
Mhm.
Have
Yeah.
you ever tried thinking about the Tolkien? Have you ever tried to write high fantasy yourself?
I have. I have tried to write. I did write a short story that I guess you could consider high fantasy, and that one was published, which I was very proud of because that was hard for me. Um, but a book, I've never been able to finish a book. I've started novels. You know how they advise you write the book you'd like to read. So I have tried science fiction, I've tried fantasy, and I've been doing this since I was what, 7 or 8 years old. Um, and I've tried romance novels because I like romance novels, and I've never been able to get beyond, say, maybe chapter 3 or 4. So I suspect for me, it's short stories and maybe, well, what I'm doing now, essays and poetry, shorter works. I
Mhm.
don't know. I like to think that maybe one day I will eventually figure out what I need to do. What I'll say is, I know my characters. I can figure out the characters, I can name them and describe them and all of that. And I have a general idea that's clear in my head about what I want to have happen, but I can never figure out what people are doing in the middle of the book. So I'll get the beginning of the book, I'll get the end of the book, but I just can't seem to manage the middle of it. It's a bit of a frustration, but I've told myself either you'll write it or you won't, and either way, I've had a real good time trying. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's true. Yeah. Um, and that brings me to mind, my husband is really into solo role-playing games. Have you heard about this trend?
I've heard of role-playing games, but not solo role-playing games.
So
What is that?
it's exactly what it sounds like, where you have an adventure, but the goal is for like just one person to do it on their own, and they sort of roll the dice and they're making up the stories on their own, and some people
Mhm.
will write and journal as they do it. And I said to him, I'm like, why aren't these people just writers? Right? Like it just felt like, why aren't
Mhm.
they just writing? And he said, well, sometimes it's not about like sort of getting it down as a whole thing. It's just about the
Mhm.
experience of going through the story. And that's kind of what I
Oh.
would like when you were describing your experience of, the beginning,
Mhm.
the end, you never can kind of get through that middle, but it's fun and interesting to try and to have that experience. So it's kind of
Oh.
made me think of that.
I might have to look into that solo role play. That might be what I need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you need prompts. There it is. You try anything that you think might help if you are determined. And yeah, I might go back to, I have manuscripts in my file cabinets that go back to my teen years. Though I've also lost a number of things. And I remember the first fantasy I tried to write. That was shortly after I read, oh, I think it was around the time, believe it or not, My Favorite Martian used to come on TV. So I had to get a Martian in there. I always loved witches. I always wanted to be a witch. So I had a witch in there. And I had read a ghost story from a collection of Alfred Hitchcock um, edited books. And so, oh, I'll have a little ghost in there. So I was just throwing in everything that I wanted to do in the book. And I think I worked on that one maybe 2, 3 years on and off. Then I decided I would try science fiction and didn't get too far with that. Then I decided I'd try fantasy again. Fantasy again. It's there. It's still with me. It may manifest. It may not. We'll see. I
Yeah.
write a great deal of, well, I am going to pull back on that. It depends on what you mean by a great deal, but I do write science fiction and fantasy poetry, and I've had some successes in getting that published. So I suspect that that's a little bit more satisfying because I got a better handle on it. And I actually enjoy reading and writing science fiction and fantasy poetry.
which do you have a preference between science fiction and fantasy?
I I don't know how to answer that really, because it really depends on the author.
Mm.
Tolkien is the big guy. And because of Tolkien, I started reading any fantasy I could get my hands on. Of course, C.S. Lewis. Though I am not as big a fan of his Narnia series, which is fantasy, but I really do like his space series, Out of the Silent Planet. And those, if you really look at them closely, are not exactly science fiction. And then, of course, there's a certain amount dated, but they're rich. So I enjoy C.S. Lewis. And then there's another author, E.R.R. Edison, who does write high fantasy. And he's very strange. A great deal of his books, there are four of them. One is unfinished. He had the beginning of the book, sort of like me, the beginning of the book and the end of the book, and had detailed outlines of the middle of the book. And that one's called The Mezentian Gate. And a lot of his book is written in Elizabethan English, which was a challenge. And I am so proud of myself that got to the point where I could actually read and understand what he was doing. The other challenge with his writing is he likes to write long, complicated sentences, which I think has been good writing exercise for me to actually see how somebody can punctuate one of these long sentences so you can still understand it. So like, it's possible. You can punctuate it and then it goes on for a whole paragraph. Still understand it. So there's E.R. Edison I like. And of course, my other favorite author, Ursula K. Le Guin. I would say that the two most influential authors are Tolkien, probably because I read Tolkien first. But if I were going to name the one author who has had the most influence on me as a person, as an individual, as someone I admire, who's aspirational to me, it would be Ursula Le Guin. And she writes both science fiction and fantasy. So it's very clear in my mind that you can do both.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Plus, she
Even
writes
even
poetry.
sometimes in the same novel, she can do both.
Yes, she can. She is an education in how to be a writer. Yeah, yeah,
And I have never actually read one of her novels. I've read some of her short stories,
yeah.
in anthologies and things, but what what book of hers, if I were going to finally get myself to read one of her novels, what should I start with?
See, that's almost impossible too, but I will try.
Okay.
Um, kind of, I will ask you, well, what kinds of things do you like? Do you like books that are connected, or do you like an individual, rather slim book? Um, there's one book she wrote that I do reread. It's called The Lathe of Heaven, Lathe, The Lathe of Heaven. I really, really like that one. Well, I don't want to give it away. Um, it's powerful. It challenges you to really think about, you know, who you think you are, how you want to be in the universe, but also um, our responsibility as human beings for the changes that we create around us. How do we perceive our power? And of course, Le Guin, like Tolkien, is very concerned with the issue of uses of power. And well, that's endlessly fascinating because even if that question is addressed to us in a fictional setting, a science fiction or fantasy section, if you are really thinking about what your author is doing, you can see how it applies to your individual life. So I'd recommend The Lathe of Heaven.
Okay.
Her Earthsea series, she's absolutely famous for that series of books, and I've written an essay on that. Individual books. They're science fiction books. One of the most famous is I'm going blank on my title. I can't believe I'm doing that, but give me a minute and it'll come to me. Ask me another question.
Okay.
I should run away and just sweep up all my Ursula Le Guin books and bring them back here to my office so I can just read off the titles to you. So I'm a big fan. I really push Ursula Le Guin because I think we are improved by reading her stories.
Well, then I will definitely, I will put that on, I will move it up to the top of my reading list. It's
I
been on
think
my
you
reading
should.
list for a long, like just to read some of
Mhm.
her has always been on there. So I'll move her up on my list.
Okay. Yeah, The Left
Um,
Hand of Darkness. That's the title I was reaching for. The Left Hand of Darkness is one of her earlier books, and it's classic science fiction. It's classic. You should start with The Left Hand of Darkness, maybe. Either that or The Lathe of Heaven.
okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Thank you. I will check those out.
All right.
Um, Another question that I have for you, what advice would you have for an earlier version of yourself?
Okay. Yeah, I would tell myself, okay, I guess it depends on how young I want to tell myself, but the person I really want to advise would be me at college, undergraduate college age, between 18 and 22 when you graduate. And I would tell myself to apply to more colleges than I did and give myself more choices. I did not apply to enough colleges because I suspect for me, college was just sort of an extension of school. And I did not think of choosing a college in terms of discovering new possibilities in your life, especially when it concerns careers. For me, it was like, oh, you've got to find another school to go to. So, yes, I would tell myself to apply to more colleges, even though the college I went to uh, was a good fit. Apply to more colleges. Oh, ask your professors for help. I learned that as an instructor myself. I really began to wish that my students would just come to me and say, you've given an assignment, I can't figure it out. Help. And then you could talk and figure out, well, what is it, you're not getting? What information are you not processing? But I think I know I did. I finally figured this out. I thought my job as a student was to, accept the assignment and then go away and do the best I can, figure everything out, and then hand it back to the professor and say, well, put the grade on it. But that's not the best way to learn. I have learned as I've gone along. It's like, no, it's not about the grade. And if you have no ideas for that paper or that project you've been assigned, there's no shame in going to your professor and saying, you know what, I'm drawing a blank here. Got any suggestions, and doing some back and forth conversation because people have good ideas. That's one of the reasons I really like working with a writers group now. I'm not doing it all by myself. My fellow writers, look at what I've written and their responses give me ideas that help me improve. Or, it's like, I wasn't certain about this poem. It's just not the way I want it. And they'll read it and talk about it. And all of a sudden an idea will occur. Oh, that's what I need to do with that poem. So, yeah, that's what I tell my younger self. Go to your professors, apply to more schools and go to your professors when you get there.
Oh, that is such good advice. Did you do your undergrad and your master's at the same place, or did you go to someplace different?
Oh, and there was a whole generation between.
Uh,
I went to a small college in upstate New York, believe it or not. And there's a whole story about how I got there, Geneva, New York. Hobart and William Smith colleges, they're coordinate colleges. Hobart was for men and William Smith was for women, and they were very small. When I enrolled at William Smith, I think we had 500 women, and that was in the 70s. That was 1971 when I enrolled. And I got my master's at Florida State I enrolled at Florida State in 1990. So that, like I said, there's a whole life in between my undergrad and my graduate endeavors. Thank goodness. I think if I had gone straight into a master's program, I would have been doing the same thing, which is, oh, here's an assignment. I must go away and figure it out and present what I have to my professors and allow them to judge it. I still did a little of that in as a master's student, but age helped. I had some excellent professors at FSU. I really enjoyed my getting my master's degree at FSU. So yeah, they were easy to talk to, and their assignments were just challenging in the best way possible. It was not possible to just sort of sit there and absorb. I had to work with it. I'm a much better person, I think. I'm a happier person, let's put it that way.
Oh, that's excellent.
Mhm.
What advice do you think that any of those earlier versions of Melanie would
Mhm.
have for you now? If she could get in a time machine, show up in your office right now, what kind of advice do you think that she would give you?
Okay. Actually, I think younger me would give me the advice older me would give younger me. And that's um, be braver. Be braver. I needed to have risk being embarrassed a little bit more in a lot of aspects of my life. Just get out there. You won't die of embarrassment. I think younger me would have wanted me to be braver, older me to have been braver. Take a few more chances. Um, Learn to be more assertive. Younger me would want older me to be more assertive. And so older me would also like to be more assertive. Oh, and to get out of my head more. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think younger you would say about the sort of unfinished novels that have the end and beginning but no middle? What do you think she'd
Uh,
say?
Younger me would, I don't know. I think younger me would be very sympathetic with older me because she had the same problem. And we would sit together and commiserate with each other and say, well, we're going to live with this. And maybe one day we'll figure out what it is that goes in the middle of these novels that we got the beginning and got the end. It's a journey. Sometimes I think, though, I like to think that I have grown as a person, but that's still quite a bit of the younger me and the older me. I still like the same kinds of books, only of course, uh, I like the more grown-up versions of science fiction. At least I think I do. I still read children's books though, and that's why one of the reasons I think After Ever After has come out the way it has. One of the subtitle of After Ever After is a story for the long lived, because when I wrote it for people of my generation. Those of us who are old enough to have lost enough people that we know what grief is, and we also are aware that that's going to keep happening. I am the elder generation now. The generation above me, most of those people are gone. It was a bit of a shock. Um, and I know that more losses are ahead of people my age, and we know that. So I did write this book for older people in my generation. But fortunately, people have told me that um, the message that I'm trying to convey, directly or indirectly, is good for anybody, because it's also very true that even very young people have to face these losses of people they love. So I think the book itself was wiser than I am. And but I still like the the kinds of reading, the kinds of poetry. And if I want to, I'll go buy a children's book. And I'll tell myself I'm buying it for my grandsons, but now they're older, they don't read children's books anymore. And I'm looking at my grand nieces and nephews, they're growing up too. And I'm just, don't be embarrassed by it. Just buy the book and read it to any child who might be interested. It's okay. It's on my shelf.
You can read it to your inner child.
I'm reading it to my inner child. That's the best thing about some books. There really isn't an age connected to it. We like to divide it up, but I'm trying to think of writers who will tell you point blank, don't say, well, I'll write a children's book. That's easier. No, it's not. You might not need to write as a longer book, bigger book. You might want to form some pictures in your head, but books that we call children's books ought to be valuable and readable to adults. The best of them are. So yeah, I still have my children's books, and I have literally some of the books that I had as a child are still on my shelves.
Oh,
So,
what is your favorite book that you still have from when you were a child, like of children's books that you have?
okay. There's there was a series that my mother, a book club that my mother, yeah, I have to kudos to my mother and father. They had us reading. My mother had us in a reading club. Alice in Wonderland. Now, I actually don't have the original Alice that we first bought because my sisters and I read that book till it fell apart. And then we got another version of Alice. And let me think. I think I have a version of the version because Alice was very popular in the family, and we read that one to bits. We read that one to bits. That was a collection of short stories, and that is original. I can't call the title that right now. But you know how people used to pull together stories for children, right? And they wouldn't be children's stories in that sense. They're fairy tales and um, tales of travel. I have one of those, and yeah, that is the original. Um, it's so old that we wrote in it because we didn't know any better. We were too young to know that you don't write in books.
The big
Yes,
crayon scrolls and the
yes, there are crayon scrawls, and so I can look at that and see what my penmanship looked like when I was about 4 or 5 years old. That book's still on my shelf, and yeah, if they haven't fallen completely to pieces, I've kept as many as I could keep my hands on. And if I couldn't keep them, I've gone back and rebought them, repurchased them. Some books you need on your shelf. I still have copies of Winnie the Pooh in the house at Pooh Corner, which
oh,
I also loved. And I eventually replaced my copy of Little Women, Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. I really like that. I love those stories, the Louisa
very
May
nice.
Alcott stories.
Oh,
Read those until they fell to pieces.
that's another one I also haven't read.
Really?
Yeah, I did not. I was really into Girl of the Limberlost. I got when I was like 11 and kind of read that in the same way that I think other people maybe read Little Women, but I never,
Mhm.
for some reason, just never really came across it until, yeah.
Yeah, until
Should read
somebody
it. I'll
bought
put
it.
it on my list.
Yeah, go ahead. My aunt gave my sisters and me just a series of Louisa May Alcott books, and they were all bound in the same way, and they had a cameo on the front. Somewhere, I think I still have one of those, but it's so fragile. I packed it up in plastic, in a plastic bag, and put it away. So not only did my parents encourage us to read, my aunt encouraged us to read, and there was Little Women, and then there was Little Men, and then there was Joe's Boys, and Eight Cousins, and Rose and Bloom. And it was like, there they were. And we blew through those books. uh, I just, yeah, in some ways, I realized a lot of the books I read, they were about people who were very different from me and my sisters. And that was actually part of the charm.
Mm.
Yeah. But part of the charm of Little Women for me was at the time, there were four of us. My youngest sister is 14 years younger than I am, but there were four of us. And so, there are four sisters in Little Women. So I did that. Well, who do I identify with in Little Women? And that was fun. I identified with Jo because she was a writer, but I also identified with Beth because Beth was shy and played the piano, and I was shy and played the piano a little bit too. That's part of it.
Yeah. And yeah, you can identify with more than one. You can
Absolutely.
little bits and all for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who we're running a little bit low on time toward
Okay.
the end here, but there's one more question that I want to ask you before I let you go.
Okay.
Um, you also write poetry. So who's
Yes.
your favorite poet? What poet should people read?
There's no such thing in my life as a favorite anybody.
Right.
Uh, so there's favorites. Ursula Le Guin, definitely. Um, Mary Oliver, Alice Walker, definitely, and Nikki Giovanni. My heart is still breaking. We lost Nikki this year, and
Yeah.
my heart is still breaking about that. Nikki Giovanni, Rumi, 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 Wendell Berry. Um, I like the haiku artists. I really like a lot of the Japanese and Chinese poets from, you know, three numeral centuries ago. uh, one, what's her name? Izumi Shikabu. She was born in 974. And I have a collection. And of course, her poems are translated, and I love her as well. I'm going to mention two of our local poets, Mary Jane Riles and Carol Lynn Knight. They are friends. We're in the same writing group, and I just love their writing. They are wonderful poets, wonderful poets. So yeah, so count all um, the older Japanese and Chinese poets if you can find them. What is it? The three haikuists, Basho Issa and Busan. I love them. There was another woman, Chiyo Na, who wrote haiku. I read everything of hers I can get my hands on. And Natsumi So Seki. Um, I wish I could write haiku. I'm working on it, but it's trickier than it's trickier to do.
Yeah, to get that.
Yeah, get that imagery, get that emotion, get that vision in three or fewer lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. Powerful stuff when you can pull it off. I'm working on it.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing haikus from you in the future. Thank you so much for coming in and chatting with me today, Melanie. This has been absolutely lovely.
Oh, yes, thank you for inviting me, and I've loved talking with you, and I hope we can talk again sometime.
What a fun interview that was. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed talking. Another thing I wanted to highlight about Melanie's book, After Ever After, are the lovely illustrations done by Carol Lynn Knight. Look at this cool stuff, right? Oh, is it is my room too dark to show? Hold on. Let me see if I can. I've already got all my lights on in here. I should get some. I'll get some more lights. But look how beautiful. I guess you'll just have to buy a copy of the book so you can see the pictures yourself. But she's just and there's even can't remember what that's called when it's like done on the first letter illuminations. No, there's some other word for that. But they're just absolutely lovely illustrations. I think I also like this a little at the back. And where's that moth? There's like a little Luna moth in here somewhere too. Anyway, I'm not gonna make you sit here and watch me dig around. Anyway, just know, oh look, there it's on the back cover anyway. Just lovely, just really cool stuff. So I hope that you will check out After Ever After. I also hope that you will check out the writing prompts that will be on the Substack, the Meter and Mayhem Substack, to help you get a little bit of inspiration from Melanie's work. Thanks for stopping by.